And new tonight, a candlelight vigil was held Wednesday evening for the victims of ICE. Religious leaders and community activists addressed their concerns for those who have died in ICE custody. At 6 this evening, a group of around 20 people gathered at the local coffee shop, Tamp and Grind. They then walked a couple of blocks down to Alexander Fulton Mini Park, carrying candles along the way. The activists felt it was necessary to demonstrate publicly because of the number of deaths as a result of immigration enforcement and detention that have occurred recently, including the 2 fatal shootings that killed Renee Good and ICU nurse Alex Pretti in Minneapolis. At the park, religious leaders of the Cenla community spoke in front of the crowd where prayers, songs, and public speeches were given.
Tonight, what we want to do is remember these are people who weren't breaking the law, and they lost their lives because they stood up for principle.
The Facebook group Cenla Activism, which helped organize the candlelight vigil, told us they plan to continue holding demonstrations in the near future.